Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy that you were able to come back to hear the more recent history of the brothers in their 150-year saga. And here is Brother Gregory to continue that. Thank you.
The brothers in the Southwest United States played a very important role in creating a new district in the Institute, the New Orleans Santa Fe district. The brothers had some French and Mexican roots. What happened here? 1870-71, the defeat of France in the Franco-Prussian War, led to the establishment of the Third Republic in France. In France, there were very deep religious and political divisions, and the Catholics seemed to almost make up their minds from the start they would not accept the Republican government. Even when Pope Leo XIII suggested that a Republican government was not that bad, it was okay if the people wanted that, the Catholics in general did not accept that situation. What happened was, as the people controlling the Republic got more and more in control of everything, they decided that the schools were an essential element in the whole national setup. What they wanted was free, lay-taught Republican schools. And they started working to make all the schools in France free, taught by lay teachers, not religious, and teaching Republican ideals. Eventually, as part of this, the brothers were forced out of the public schools, though this took a number of years and was not as easy and simple as it might look. However, the brothers were able to find Catholics of wealth and position who would support their schools, so the schools continued. The Republicans, anti-clericals, decided there was only one thing to do: get rid of all the Catholic schools by legal action. In 1904, a law was passed forbidding Catholic religious to teach school in France. Now, because the brothers were so numerous, there were 10,000 brothers teaching in France, it would take 10 years to close all the schools. Interestingly, all except 4 were closed. These 4 were still functioning when World War I began, and they were never closed. The brothers there continued as if nothing had happened. But in 1904, brothers in France found they had to make some decisions. What to do? One decision was to remain in France, but laicize the school. What did this mean? Well, the brothers would not wear their religious habits. They would not be called brother. They'd be called monsieur. A group of them might live together, but this would be, well, this is a bachelor's boarding house. It's not a religious community. And of course, they were hiding things, concealing things. The government was out to see if they were hiding and concealing things. Prior to 1914, this was very dangerous. It could create problems. During the First World War, brothers who were laicized, brothers who left, went to other countries, came back, served in the French armed forces, and after the war was over, they just stayed in France. And if you had served in the trenches, you were untouchable. But in 1904, the situation was very desperate for the brothers who wanted to stay in France. So many of them went to Spain, where they were taught Spanish, and apparently there was a very good teaching program for teaching them Spanish because they became quite proficient in the language. And then, what would they do? They would go to various places in Latin America, which had been asking for brothers' schools sometimes for 30 or 40 years. And our institute really took off in Latin America after 1904. And many schools were opened there, and a number of the French brothers went to Mexico. And they very quickly started establishing a district, successful schools. Years later, men who had attended those schools still considered them the best education they'd received, the brothers had actually got into the textbook publishing business in Mexico in very few years. So it was really establishing a going situation. However, in 1914, a revolution which had been brewing for a long time broke out, and the revolutionaries were very definitely anti-clerical, anti-Catholic, against the Catholic religious, against the Catholic schools, and the brothers, of course, found their situation simply precarious. In one place, 4 brothers were put to death, and the only reason given by the revolutionaries who did it was that you were teaching catechism to the young people. Well, the brothers who were there had to leave the country. Some irony with this. A number of them went to Cuba. They arrived in Cuba just about the moment World War I was breaking out. The French consul was down at the docks to greet them, give them their call up to the military service. In France, you cannot give up or lose your citizenship. You are a Frenchman or a French woman, no matter what you do. And the French brothers were told they had 2 simple choices: return to France, do their military duty, or you better never come back to the country again, because we know how to deal with people like you who desert your country at this time. Some brothers went back, others decided to simply remain in Cuba or go elsewhere, but they were not going to go back to France. A number of brothers came to the United States, and the first problem they faced was practically none of them knew any English. Prior to 1900, in different parts of France, depending where you were studying to be a brother, you were taught a foreign language. For those down by the Pyrenees, they were taught Spanish. For those living toward Germany, they were taught German. For those living up in northwest France, Normandy, they were taught English. A few of the latter came to the United States. Most who came to the United States were fluent in 2 languages, French and Spanish. Their first problem was to learn English. Now, when they had gone to study Spanish in Spain, they arrived there at an age when educators say, with good instruction, you can really master a language. And many of them really mastered Spanish. When they got to the United States, which was, of course, a different language, they had a very serious problem here. However, they set to work trying to learn English, and they were also had some hopes. Mexico had had revolutions before. This one won't last. This situation won't be around for long. And we'll go back to Mexico and restart our work there. Well, I think rather quickly it became apparent this was a nice idea, totally impractical. It was not going to happen. And then, of course, what were these brothers going to do? Well, many of them were mastering English to a certain extent, and they had to accept the fact they were going to work in the United States. In case you're interested, it was only in 1940, well after this time, that the brothers would have been able to start doing work like they had been doing in Mexico before 1914. And actually, the seminary to train Mexican priests remained in the United States until 1980. And before that time, the bishops didn't really feel it was safe to go back to Mexico or have these young men study for the priesthood there. So you see, the brothers were really forced out of Mexico. Now, what were they going to do? Well, the superiors decided that the New Orleans district, which had folded in 1900, my father graduated from the last school the St. Louis brothers had in New Orleans in 1900. He was a member of the last graduating class, that they were going to reestablish that district. Also, they were going to reestablish the Santa Fe district, and that these brothers who had come from France, come to Mexico, now in the States, they would be the ones who would establish this new district. And that, well, there was a basis for establishing a district. There were 3 schools in Mexico, St. Michael's College, which was very solid and prosperous, the school in Bernalillo, which was very secure, and then the one in Las Vegas, which, well, maybe there could be some problems, I think I said enough about that. I'll have to come back to that topic. And almost immediately, though they could not return to the city of New Orleans, in the Diocese of Lafayette, a newly created diocese, a school was established and requests for other schools were heard. So these brothers were French brothers with their past experiences, were going to establish a new district in Louisiana and in New Mexico. And this they set about doing. In 1916, 1918, 1921, various steps were taken, and you could say by 1921, the District of New Orleans-Santa Fe was established. The question was, what would be the future? How many schools would they have? Which schools would prosper? But there was a possibility you could have a new district. And of course, the brothers here in the southwest U.S. were really, in a sense, the core of this district. More brothers here than anywhere else where this district was supposed to develop. Okay? Almost immediately, these brothers encountered a problem which other people shared. Apparently, after World War I, many states started taking a new look at teacher certification and teacher education. You might want to remember here in this country, I've had to explain this to foreign brothers, there's no national accreditation for teachers. Each of the 50 states and the District of Columbia set the standards for those teaching in that particular jurisdiction. Well, depending again on the economy of the area, more vigorous steps were taken to set about establishing very definite requirements for teacher training. Could you get a teacher certificate? Could you teach? And of course, these French brothers had a very interesting problem they had to face. When they took over the schools, and as they mastered English, everybody admitted they were very competent teachers. They were doing a very good job of teaching the young people. However, if the question came up about, do you have a teacher certificate? And as part of this movement, schools had to be certified by the state. And of course, if you had no teachers with teacher certificates in the school would not be certified by the state. And could a school survive if it was not certified by the state? And there was an answer sort of feeling, well, no, this won't work. So these brothers now had another problem to face. How do we become certified teachers? Apparently, they found the state superintendent of education in New Mexico extremely sympathetic, understanding, but also saying, this cannot go on forever and ever. Something has to be done. One of the people who stepped in and decided something would be done was Brother Abban Phillip. He was one of the 12 assistant superior generals. That's the second highest rank then in the Institute at that time. And he was connected with New York. And he said, well, we got to find a way to do something about this. Let's get busy. And they started something which today most people would say, you couldn't do that. You couldn't get away with it. Manhattan College became the college of record for giving bachelor's degrees to the brothers so they could get their teacher certificates. Now, how do you get a bachelor's degree from Manhattan College if you've never set foot on the Manhattan campus, much less in New York City once? Well, the brothers here, I think some of the work they had done previously was certified. We'll give you credit for this. Probably they could all get credit for French. Probably most of them could get credit for Spanish, okay? Now let's see, you got to start taking courses. What did this mean? Correspondence courses, Saturday courses, summer courses, and the brothers in the United States and other areas were very cooperative in helping here. Manhattan College was not the only one involved. There was a brother originally from New York who went to California, a brother Bede Edward, who was in education. He became a regular visitor to Santa Fe during the summer, where he taught 1 or 2 courses to the brothers, And of course, sometimes they took one or two other courses, and they were piling up the courses they needed to get a bachelor's degree. And eventually, many of them, brothers as late as in the 1930s, earned their BA from Manhattan College without ever seeing the institution. I don't know whether it was a depression situation. People were, let's see, you have students, we don't have students, why do you have students? Other colleges raised the question about what Manhattan was doing here, and probably you could say it was out of bounds, shouldn't be done. So that had to come to an end. Well, what do we do? Well, the Brothers of Mary were running St. Mary's in San Antonio. They accepted, gave credit for work young brothers had done in a scholastic established here. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. They accepted work brothers had done at Manhattan, or some had done at Tulane in Loyola in New Orleans, at Tulane in New Orleans, a few courses. And then, well, you need so many more credits to get a bachelor's degree, and we will give you your bachelor's degree. They also ran limited master's programs, and some of the brothers eventually moved into these programs. The help of the Brothers of Mary here was priceless, and up to 1950, this was continued. I believe then, because of their working toward accreditation, that they had to drop some of these programs. But of course, by 1950, the situation had changed a little bit for the better. What did this come out of this? Well, you had very competent administrators. Some of these French brothers who took over schools very quickly showed they were, well, you weren't going to find better school administrators. Many very competent teachers, some struggling a little bit with their English, but still their students were learning very well. And the schools were accredited by the state, the teachers were accredited by the State Department of Education, and the brothers had solved the crisis. But considering their experience in France, the World War I experience of some of these men, their experience in Mexico, their learning English, to face this problem of getting education and certification, just one more problem, that men coped with this successfully, and they were able to establish schools, which very quickly established a reputation. Oh, by the way, again, depending on where you were in the economic situation in the area, I found as late as the 1950s, there were still non-brothers who had lifetime elementary certificates in Louisiana. They had the equivalent of maybe 3 years of college. So some of the brothers actually got their certificates on that same basis and remained as elementary school teachers. But you do have to admire the determination of the brothers to do something here, because they really had to face a difficulty. The next thing which came up was, if you want to have a district, you need a center for training your people. I suspect that one of the problems Brother Podolphe and others faced when they tried to have a novitiate prior to 1900, they tried to have this at St. Michael's College, which is trying to have two things that weren't too compatible in the same place. You needed a place. Well, where do we establish this center where we're going to train future brothers? I have conflicting information regarding the college the Jesuits built in Las Vegas, New Mexico. When exactly did the Jesuits finally shake all the dust from their feet there and leave? Some people say it was as late as 1916, 1917. And there seems to be some evidence to that effect. When they left, they sold it to the Oblates of Mary Immaculate, who took the building. Apparently, they looked over the building, looked over the situation, and asked the question, how did we ever get into this? Next question, what do we do with it? Because, well, the brothers were looking for a place, and the Oblates were quite willing to sell, and probably with help received from Europe, loans, donations, the brothers were able to buy this property, And this was the origin of what became known in the New Orleans Santa Fe district as Sacred Heart Training College. At this time, it had been very hard in the United States to find a young man who was a priest or a brother who had not gone through what was called the junior seminary or the equivalent. We called it the junior novitiate, the 4 high school years. And of course, the brothers established a junior novitiate where young men would go through high school and prepare for the novitiate. Then a novitiate, and then a scholasticate, or teacher training section. All 3 of these were established in Sacred Heart Training College in 1918, or very shortly thereafter. How were they going to make a living there? Well, for instance, they had some irrigated farmland. However, some of the brothers said if there was a good snowfall that year, there was irrigation water well into the summer, and you'd have a good crop. If there was a poor snowfall, maybe by end of June, you had no more irrigation, and that didn't help your crops. But the crops they were supposed to raise were supposed to be a main source of food. They also had some chickens, provide eggs, and some cows provided dairy. And of course, the other interesting thing about this was in West Las Vegas. This was in the middle of the city. If you could imagine a irrigated farm with chickens and cows in the middle of the city. And nobody seemed to think that was that extraordinary. It continued that way until 1947. What about the buildings? Well, the buildings were mainly adobe. In one place, one wall was 12 feet thick, if you can believe that. Now, all the walls weren't that thick. There was also a stone portion which had been attached to the adobe building, and immediately when the brothers moved in, they discovered that there were a few things they had to fix up. As late as the summer of 1946, which was on the eve of leaving the place, they were still doing some extensive repairs on the floors and areas, which, by the way, needed them quite badly. So this was the place. Okay. What was the level of life there? Well, the famous story is in 1940, when the census taker came around, I guess perhaps because maybe the Depression was over, they were asking questions about, income, and what kind of money do you have, and, how do you support people here? I can't get a final answer on this. I was told that if you figured out all the money spent in a calendar year at Sacred Heart Training College, it was somewhere between 9 and 17 cents per person. That was all the money spent on each person there. When the census taker heard this, said simply, "This is humanly impossible. You can't do it. You can't live." Well, somebody said if they'd have showed the census taker the income money that came in, what they spent, they'd have found this was it. So how would you say life there could at times be a little bit trying? Would that be a good expression to use? In 1926, the section for high school boys and the novitiate were moved down to Lafayette, Louisiana. I think the point was that more and more of the young men for the novitiate were coming from down south, and that it was more convenient to have them there. And then however, after a little while, they reestablished a high school section in Las Vegas, mainly for boys who came from Denver, Santa Fe, not too many, El Paso, and because this was closer to their homes. So this was where you had these two. Now, the scholasticate, which was to provide teacher training, and which gradually developed to offering the equivalent of college courses, continued there in Las Vegas. I discovered very recently, well into the 30s, the question was raised repeatedly if it would be possible to find some Catholic college where nearby the young brothers would have a residence and they would do their college work in that college, and then live in this Scholasticate. And of course, that would have meant the end of the Scholasticate in Las Vegas. This, it was said, would have been a better thing to do. However, everything they explored fell through, and these young brothers, after they finished the novitiate, did at least 2 years in Las Vegas, getting the equivalent of college courses. Of course, since Manhattan College, and then later on St. Mary's, accepted and evaluated these as college credit, there was no great problem there. But of course, someone might have said a higher quality of training would have been better, but you had to do what you could. In 1942, after some young men had had a 4-year or 3-year program, 3 years of studies, 1 year of what was called teacher training, they were given their Bachelor of Arts degrees from Sacred Heart Training College. And both New Mexico and Louisiana, those are 2 important states, accepted these for teacher certification. In 1943 and 1944, 2 more groups completed this 4-year, 3-year program, received their bachelor's degrees, and at the same time, there was some sort of a hookup with Catholic University in Washington, D.C., which said it recognized the work that was done there. You're attached to, affiliated with the Catholic University. So it gave the academic work some standing, though of course a number of people said if someone wanted to be unpleasant, uncooperative, mess things up, they could have asked a few questions, and your answers, they would have suggested very firmly, well, you have no right to a teacher's certificate. That this could not continue. This was the problem that was being faced. This was one reason why, and again, I will talk about that after, 3 o'clock, why there was this movement to establish a college where the young brothers would live on the college campus, take courses with the regular students, and of course, as the college established its reputation, the young brothers would have regularly accredited courses. There'd be no question about their situation. But of course, this was in the future. How is this place seen by people who live there or visited there? In the 1930s, a French major superior, because the French superiors were still very much interested in the work being done in the New Orleans Santa Fe district, most of the brothers were still of this French group. He visited Sacred Heart Training College, and as he left, he said, "This is a real Vaugirard of the Institute." What was Vaugirard? It was a place where St. LaSalle and the First Brothers lived. Something of a joke in one of his biographies was that if the brothers had taken everything they owned in Vaugirard, put it out on the sidewalks in front of the house, nobody would have bothered to pick it up. It wasn't worth even stealing. That was their degree of poverty. And this was how this place was seen. The other famous story was that in 1948, after the scholastics had been moved to the St. Michael's College, the new college level, the Superior General was here for the centenary of the brothers in the United States. He said he had heard so much about Las Vegas from the brothers, he wanted to see the place. So if the Superior General wants to see a place, you take him there. Well, they took him there. He looked around. It was now West Las Vegas Junior High School, but he had no trouble looking around. As he was leaving, he looked at the brothers and said, "Why was anybody objecting to leaving this place?" And this, again, was a verdict of what you had. So you might say that, It was the cradle of our district. The first brothers, first U.S. brothers, really, this is where they got their training. This is where they lived through the situation, and so forth. I spent only 1 year there, and I do have to say, personally, it is the only place in my life where I have been both cold and hungry for a number of months. So I fit in well with the rest of the people there. My mother came to visit me after we were in Santa Fe, And she had heard from the mothers of brothers in New Orleans about the Sacred Heart Training College. And she said she told them she really wanted to see the place. She'd heard so much about it. But by that time, we were in Santa Fe, so she came there. And one of the mothers said, well, the place is interesting. It needs a few repairs. And we thought that was one of the nicest things that was said about the place. So the brothers who established the district working through this, you have to say, they really faced the difficulties and overcame them. Now, while this was going on, the brothers at St. Michael's College were what? Continuing their work, and they were going to do things which really made them part of the made the establishment of the New Orleans Santa Fe district possible. Their contributions, raising money, providing support, and so on. First thing, after the death of Brother Botulphe, between 1906, his death, and 1916, when this was turned over to the brothers from France who had come from Mexico, there were four different directors at the school. I wondered what this meant, except when I looked into the thing, I found out a man was sent to run the school there. Apparently, he was on top of the situation. They decided there was some other school that needed his talent. So he was removed. It was not failure, it was a success. And that these men really built on the good work Brother Botulphe had done, and that the school was going very well, and that well administered. Okay? The boarding section was the source of extra income, and it was extremely important for maintaining the work of the brothers, particularly after 1916, 1918. In 1907, they had 156 boarders. When I looked at the facilities later on, I heard that number. I almost wondered where they put them. But however, in 1908, it got up to 192. So they really must have been crowded in. But also, I think it made another point. Here in New Mexico, in the Southwest, people were still looking for quality education, and that they were told, you go to St. Michael's College for your high school, you'll get a good education. So the school was going very well. However, there was a health problem developed, and a number of boarders became sick, and it was decided it was better for them to go home. So there was some reduction in the number of boarders, but still, the income from the boarders was extremely important for supporting the work of the brothers. Okay? 1909, they celebrated 50 years in Santa Fe. And apparently there was quite a celebration for those times. And everybody was saying prospects look good. Prospects couldn't look better. And that there was lots of reason for doing this. And the alumni were very influential in the local area, and very proud of the fact that they were St. Michael's College alumni. In 1910, finally, New Mexico was going to get statehood. It was necessary to call a convention of local people to write the new state constitution. 22 of the 40 delegates to the convention were St. Michael's College alumni. It gives you an idea of their prominence. However, I've often wondered, because of things I learned later, whether we should want to brag about the Constitution written by the St. Michael's College alumni. I found a number of people in New Mexico who made the point, it's cheaper to raise a cow than to raise a chicken in New Mexico. The cattlemen wrote the Constitution. So they took good care of themselves when writing the Constitution. Anyway, it was done, and now it would become a state. The Mexican brothers who took over found 3 schools, 2 quite solid, St. Michael's College, St. Nicholas and Bernalillo, one that posed some problems, and they started taking over, facing the situations, and facing them successfully. A brother, Nicias Bertin, became the president of St. Michael's College and the visitor of the new district. And he also had some other good news. In 1918, the Benedictines in Covington, Louisiana, turned over St. Paul's to the brothers. This was in the Archdiocese of New Orleans. Apparently, the bishop didn't know about this. Well, I'm not too sure still how this was done, but then also in the new Diocese of Lafayette, a school was opened in New Iberia. So there seemed to be the prospects of the work expanding, if not in New Mexico, well, expanding down in Louisiana, continuing the New Orleans-Santa Fe district. However, very soon, the brothers encountered two crises. The first one came in 1918 when Brother Nicias Bertrand discovered he had cancer. At that time, cancer was much more a fatal disease than it is right now. Doctors tried to do what they could for him. They couldn't do much. And in 1922, he died and was replaced by a brother, Charlemagne, who turned out to be equally competent as an administrator. So what the state superintendent of education had said about they do not have U.S. college diplomas, graduate diplomas, but they certainly know how to run a school and to make it run well. That things were going very well, and that, again, everybody was very optimistic for the future. However, not too long after this, on the 15th of June, 1922, 15 of the brothers, along with 6 of the boarders who were still at the school, decided to go on a summer picnic in a truck. They went to the Pecos River area. I have a suspicion that getting to the Pecos River area in 1922 might have been a little more of an adventure than it would be today. Well, coming back near what was called the Oldest Well, you can decide for yourself whether it fits the name, the truck had an accident. The driver lost control, slid off the road, went down 15 feet into the embankment. Brother Charlemagne was killed instantly. A brother, Agatha and Andrew, received injuries from which he died, and other brothers were injured. And of course, this was a losing 2 directors, 2 chief administrators in such a short time was really a shock for the brothers, a crisis. The funerals of the brothers showed that no matter how short a time they had been in Santa Fe, they were well appreciated by the people here, that the brothers were solidly established. Second crisis, a new director took over, got the school going, prospects looked very good. On the 30th of November in 1926, a fire broke out in the classroom building and spread to the dormitory. 2 brothers who were supervising the boys in the dormitory woke up, got all the boys out of the dormitory. There was no loss of life. But it looked like, according to the firemen, the fire was totally out of control. We tried, we can't put it out. The building's going to disappear completely. The older boys ran in, started pulling furniture and equipment out, took the hoses from the firemen, and put out the fire. Only part of the building was destroyed. And this was due to the, role of the boarders. They refused to give up. However, this happened at a bad time. The need to expand down in Louisiana, the district had, after pondering the situation, made a loan from the bank to get the money they needed. St. Michael's College had promised, through their boarding section, to raise money to help pay off the debt. Well, what was the future of St. Michael's College after this fire? Brother Auguste, who was another capable administrator, he got busy almost immediately contacting friends, former students, for money. And apparently he was getting some money. Also, he organized things to the extent they only missed 1 day of school, though the fire had started in the school building. A new public school building had just been completed. It would not be occupied until the next school year. Classes moved there. A friendly hotel, the Coronado Hotel, took in the boarders. So the school could continue, though of course, once again, what's the future? Before school resumed in January after the Christmas vacation, all repairs needed on the existing buildings had been completed, and they could start using them more. But of course, it was very simple. We do not have enough facilities for the enrollment we have. We need more space, and we need a new building. How can we do this? The idea of a loan, considering the financial commitments St. Michael's College had made to the district, and probably the district would have said, we can't make any more loans, we can't pay them, so we don't want that. They started praying to St. Joseph for help. Mr. Miguel Chavez, who had been at the school in 1872, a poor boy, the bishop had paid part of his tuition, if not all, so that he could stay at school for a while. However, at the age of 14, which wasn't that young for leaving school then, he had to leave because then he had to take on supporting his mother, which he did. However, he was a very resourceful, hardworking individual, and considering how he started, what he did was remarkable. He soon became a very successful businessman. So, what did he do? He agreed to give money to replace the facilities that were lost, and he was the one who paid for the Chavez Memorial, which the brothers occupied, I believe, until 1967. I first saw the place in 1946, right after I first got to New Mexico, and my only reaction was I thought it was the best school building we had in the district. That was how well his money had been spent. So the crisis was solved thanks to Mr. Chavez, and they started work in the fall of 27. In the spring of 28, they were ready so that they could move in for the school year beginning in September. The crisis was overcome. But you might say that it was something that would lead you to ask, can we keep up like this, going one thing the other like this? Brother Arsenius, who was around briefly in 1930 before he received a promotion, made some changes in the school program to conform more to state programs, because various states were setting high school education programs. You needed these courses, you needed at least one credit in this, or maybe the course should deal with this. And of course, what this happened was, it was very easy to do, but again, it ensured your accreditation. The science labs were improved, new sports facilities were constructed. So the school was moving ahead, overcoming problems. Also, during this time, a number of the French brothers mentioned, they launched a Mexican apostolate. The situation in Mexico had not improved since 1914. There were a number of families with some wealth who wanted education for their sons, and they wanted a solid education without disturbance. So you had a number of Mexican boarders at St. Michael's College. And one of the things many of them did was pick up English, become quite fluent in English. They went from St. Michael's College to American institutions of higher education, earned their degrees, went on to professional school. When we celebrated the 125th anniversary of the brothers in Santa Fe, one of the people who came was a general in the Mexican Army. He was a chief medical officer in the Mexican Army, an alumnus of St. Michael's College. And he said he was very indebted for what the brothers had done for him, including, of course, anytime they heard him speaking Spanish on campus, they made him speak English. But so the brothers were exercising an apostolate here, which was very successful. However, came the next event, which could be trying, the Great Depression, 1932. Brother Eugene was the principal. the boarding section went down to 42 boarders. And of course, it was a very simple situation across the United States. People who had the money and were willing to send a son to a boarding school were few and far between. The problem of St. Michael's College was not unique. Up in the northeast part of the country, the brothers had a military school. If you went there as a boarder, and they were all boarding students, you were in a high school ROTC unit, and there was a minimum number of students you had to have in the unit to keep your Army accreditation. One of the brothers said, September each year, the brother director carefully counted, and sometimes they had 3 or 4 more students than the minimum they needed to keep their Army accreditation. And boarding schools all over the country were going through a crisis. St. Michael's College was not unique in this. The day students paid a tuition of $2 a month. By the way, this was not that uncommon in the 1930s. However, not all of them were able to pay this minimum tuition. However, the alumni rallied and raised money to help pay tuition for some of these students. So the school was able to continue, but once again, there was a financial situation which wasn't very encouraging. In 1934, 75 years were celebrated. And there's a very interesting little book accounting things, the experience of the brothers in New Mexico up to that time. And one question came up, which I'll deal with in my next presentation. Is it time we become a college, going to higher education? Well, of course, 1934, with the Great Depression, the boarding students down like they were, day students unable to pay $2 a month tuition, there was sort of a feeling, well, let's wait a little bit, see if things improve before we do anything here. But this was the situation. Okay, what about the other 2 apostolates the brothers had? In 1916, French brothers from Mexico started taking over Salle College in Las Vegas, and apparently some of the students felt there was a language problem, and they lost some students. Another French brother took over, a brother Bertrand Victor, and he recognized something. The high school program we want to offer will be a commercial program. And at this time in the United States, the brothers had a number of high schools where the high school program was commercial. It was anything but through college. Of course, if they asked the student body who's planning to go into college, out of a couple hundred students, you might have had a dozen hands raised. So, but the point is, it trained the boys for something very useful they could do. And it attracted students. Then came World War I for the United States, and through 1920, things looked like they couldn't be better. They got up to 203 students. And those who graduated found jobs, found people wanted to hire them. However, the school building was continuing to deteriorate, but possibly because the school was providing well-trained high school graduates for local business. The local businessmen, Protestants as well as Catholics, were quite willing to contribute money to help keep the institution going. And one of the main contributors was a Mr. Charles Ilfeld, who was Jewish. He claimed as he was collecting the money and turning it over to the school, maybe I'm becoming the best Catholic in West Las Vegas. However, after 1921, another turn of events. There was a drought in New Mexico, and the prosperity which the war had brought very quickly seemed to disappear. In fact, more in New Mexico than in some other places. However, Las Vegas was a railway center for the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe. A lot of work there. And a lot of men had jobs there, and there seemed to be no danger that they would lose these jobs. You know, they had to keep on repairing the trains, maintaining the trains, and doing this work, and that you'd have some help for the economy. However, the union organizers from the East came in and convinced the railway workers they should go on a strike for higher wages, better working conditions, and that you have the railway over the barrel. They can't refuse you. So the strike started. Well, the railway apparently had reached the conclusion that with technical developments, they needed fewer places like they had in Las Vegas, and that the best place to have a center was Albuquerque. So they simply closed down the place in Las Vegas. The men lost their jobs. The local economy took a hit, which was almost impossible to describe, all for the bad. And there seemed to be no possibility of recovery. By the way, as late as the 1940s, some brothers told me, don't go to West Las Vegas and say you were a union organizer. You might have to get out of town very quickly. People felt the union organizers had done no great service for the town by pushing for this strike right after World War I. The finances simply didn't seem to improve. One time, with 150 students, all they could collect for tuition was $15 one month. Other students couldn't pay their tuition. The building was in very bad shape, and also there was a question about, well, would the state allow you to continue operating in a building like this? Somebody assessed the things and said it would cost $5,000 to $6,000 to make the building safe. Well, that money was nowhere in sight in Las Vegas or anywhere else. So there was nothing to do but simply say in 1925, we can't continue here. However, the people in Las Vegas wanted the brothers. Well, the question was raised, would it be possible for the brothers to run a school like St. Nicholas in Bernalillo, a public school? Oh, possible. This would solve some problems. However, the school would have to be co-ed. Well, as soon as that was said, it was decided not to pursue the matter. Had you asked the higher superiors who were then in Belgium about having a co-ed school, they'd have probably looked at you as if to say, what other dumb ideas do you have today? So the brothers were forced in 1925 to leave. However, the people there had very fond memories of them. Bernalillo, the brothers were collecting their salaries as teachers for the state regularly. They were able to put some money aside and to improve the facilities. In 1930, some people said the only public schools, one run by the brothers, one run by the sisters, we want a public school run by non-brothers, non-sisters. Well, the county built one. However, some people quickly noticed those who had pushed for the new school continued to send their children to the school run by the brothers and the nuns. So what was the purpose behind this? Parents outside of the Bernalillo area, apparently you could do this between World War I and World War II, actually got together and brought their students to Bernalillo for the school, St. Nicholas School and the sister school, get a better education there. So the school was doing very well. We have a vow to teach the poor gratuitously, freely. This was the only gratuitous school in the district, St. Nicholas in Bernalillo. Not that there weren't a few problems. At this time, each county in New Mexico had to raise the money for the teachers' salaries. A poor county had a very low teacher salary scale. But of course, the brothers were probably better paid than any of the other brothers in the district with these. But one year, the county was so hard up during the Depression, they simply said, we can't pay the teachers any salaries for the last 2 months of the school year. Closed down. Well, the brothers ran school for 1 more month without being paid by the county. But of course, again, with the salaries they had received up to that time, they felt they could do that. And during this time also, there was an adjoining ranch, which perhaps was providing some food and other things the brothers could use. So the situation in Bernalillo, unlike the one in Las Vegas, there's a future, looking ahead. And no doubt about it, the school had a good image, a good reputation. The brothers had been very successful there in every way. So the New Orleans Santa Fe district had something of a secure foundation, and built in part on St. Michael's College and St. Nicholas School in Bernalillo, as well as other schools that were opening. Thank you.